Hi and welcome to the Journalism Salute. I'm Mark Simon. In each episode, we'll talk to or about an interesting person or organization related to journalism. The intent is to show that journalists are not the enemy of the people. Thank you for listening. On this episode, we're joined by Peter Rice. Peter is the editor of Downtown Albuquerque News in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's been a reporter for both print outlets and local NPR stations and has written multiple books. Downtown Albuquerque News is what it says it is. It's a digital news outlet serving downtown Albuquerque and surrounding neighborhoods. Hyperlocal news. Peter, thank you for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
What's your journalism origin story, as far back as you can go?
I can go back to about age 13. I grew up in Olympia, Washington, and I was a homeschooler. So that afforded some opportunities to spend a lot of time volunteering at a local college radio station. And I did some music programming with them, but mostly it was kind of a local news focus there. So that was, it was some terrific experience. I basically spent late middle school and all of high school just wandering around a smallish town in the Pacific Northwest doing stories about stuff for a radio station. In a former time, I might have actually just graduated from high school and skipped college and had gone straight into journalism, but that's not quite how it went. But it was a great head start.
Was there anything in your heritage or upbringing that would have lent itself to being a storyteller?
I think my dad probably. He has this personality that likes to suck up every bit of information he can possibly get. I mean, he's actually quite bad at making decisions, for example, but his personality is such that he will, when asked any question, offer a very nuanced and subtle analysis of the thing. So I grew up having that as kind of my chat GPT, if you will, of the time. And it turns out that is an extremely journalistic model of thinking. So I'm sure that got hardwired in some fashion or another.
So that's a cool inherited trait, and we're going to talk more about your dad in a little bit. But first, can you walk us through some of your early work highlights, maybe in terms of where you worked and notable lessons that you would have learned in each of those spots that I referenced before?
Sure. So I guess, yeah, the as a teenager in high school, I got kind of the basics. That would have been journalism 101. Went to college in Colorado and did a series of internships there. I call that kind of journalism 201. It was still kind of the basics of, getting oriented in the trade. After college is probably when it got real. I got my first full-time job on the Oregon coast at a small twice weekly paper. And it was a really good paper, like one of these old school, just excellent community newspapers where you could really see the journalism contributing to the town's circulatory system and civic life and community life. I had this interesting experience a couple of months in where I was at this meeting and I saw a guy carrying a clipping of an article I had written, and he walked right up to Congressman Peter DeFazio, tucked it in his shirt pocket, and kind of ordered him to read it. And that was kind of an interesting moment where it's like, oh, this is real now. This is kind of the power of journalism, if you want to borrow a cliche. But in that town, there was a lot of other kind of smaller scale examples. I'd constantly be in meetings, and whenever anybody wanted to get the word out about anything, their first go-to was somebody would say, oh yeah, we got to put this in the paper. As though they worked on the paper, right? Like they had such an ownership of it that they had no doubt that they would send it to the paper. It would get in the paper and it would contribute to the conversation. And that was kind of how it worked in that town. And it was amazing to watch and participate in. From there, I got to Albuquerque in 2006 and worked for a Metro Daily there that has since gone out of business. The big lesson of that time was that Metro dailies really had no idea what the hell they were doing, and would be going down in flames very shortly. And in fact, my arrogant little prediction in my early 20s proved to be completely true. So after that, I left, I went traveling, I worked a bunch of other random jobs. I got a journeyman electrician's license at one point. And I just kind of sat there waiting for the industry to get its act together, pretty much.
What was the article that the congressman was given?
Oh, it was about transit funding. It wasn't anything special, but
Gotcha.
yeah, it was just a little financial crisis the local shuttle run by the senior center was having. And
But definitely meaningful to show that as you were saying before, that your work has considerable value to these people and is important.
yeah, and you grow up hearing about stuff like that, but until you see it, it doesn't really sink in. And that, I think, was the first time I really saw, something I was involved in being part of a policy conversation, even if it's in a very small way.
So downtown Albuquerque news comes after all of that. What's the origin story for that?
Well, the origin story is that I was waiting for the industry to get its act together, and they never did. Um, going back to the mid 2000s, I had always assumed that newspapers would evolve into a paid subscription digital delivery model with little to no emphasis on advertising. And I assumed that because the demand certainly wasn't a problem. Like, people still really liked local news, and in fact, still to this day. And people were used to paying for that news. So it seemed like the sensible capitalist thing to do to just get them to pay for a much lower overhead product, given that ads had very little future. And anyone paying attention could have told you that in 2004, 2005. So I thought that was a relatively easy transition for them to make, but of course they didn't make it, and they instead insisted on slowly killing themselves over the 2010s. I got increasingly ticked off and scared for the future of self-government. And so in 2019, I basically did what I thought they should have been doing all along, and started a for-profit local news service that has a serious paywall. It covers just 2 zip codes. And 4 years later, it's working pretty well. We've 550 subscribers, give or take, and a very secure financial position at this point. So it's been a great experience all around.
So it's your full-time thing.
Yes.
So we talk of family-owned newspapers. That was the thing as in the good times. Yours is a family-owned newsletter, a family working newsletter in full force. Explain who's on your staff.
Sure. Yeah. So it started out as me and my wife, who is the kind of copy editor / editorial sounding board, if you will. She likes to analyze news items, and is an engaged downtown area resident in her own right. Eventually, I started picking up freelancers to do odd articles here and there. Once the first year, the money wasn't great, but then things started to improve in year 2 and 3 and whatnot. And that worked out okay. But when I finally got in a position where I wanted somebody to contribute on a very regular basis as a freelancer, that's right about when my dad retired from his job in city government back in Washington State. And so he wanted some extra part-time work, and I, at that point, had the money to give it to him. So he's been with us for about 1.5 years, and that's been going great. My sister does a few odd jobs now and again. My mom has yet to do anything for the publication, but I'm sure that's just a matter of time.
What makes the downtown Albuquerque area so interesting to cover? Like, what are the characteristics of the area?
Yeah, downtown Albuquerque in particular is a really interesting journalistic beat. And that is in part because it has a lot going against us or against it. Like a lot of American downtowns, it was hollowed out by suburbanization over the past several decades. It's been hit pretty hard by homelessness and crime. And as if that wasn't bad enough, COVID pretty well, as if that wasn't bad enough, the few crumbs we had coming in from the commuter class kind of evaporated during COVID and have only come back to, maybe 50% of their former capacity. So there's a lot running against us, but there's actually a lot of inspiring people still here who are trying to make it a lot better. So it seems like we've got a good group of people who are trying to revitalize things and really want to make it work. And of course, downtowns everywhere are sort of famous for attracting pretty quirky people, and that tends to make journalism fun. And then as to this larger redevelopment project, we've had some false summits on this before. Like, people have been trying to revitalize downtown for a long time, but it really wouldn't surprise me if in 2 to 5 years it actually starts to take. The city's doing quite a lot to set it up for success, and there seems to be a decent chance that it will actually take off, and that is fun to cover, the prospect. And if it actually does take off, that'll be even more fun to cover. So it's a great journalism project all along, and the surrounding neighborhoods are pretty fun too.
You said that it's great to cover. You mentioned the quirky people and the interesting things. I heard you do another interview where you referred to what you wanted to do as people stuff you can walk to. So within one of these weekly newsletters that you do, what's the overarching goal?
Yeah, so I guess if we want to start with the broad philosophical stuff, it's we want people to take a well-informed interest in their surroundings and in local government. So in any given week, hopefully there's something about, what the city is doing, what businesses are doing, what civic and cultural groups are doing, and also something fun involving a common touch point. And that's kind of where the people and stuff you can walk to idea comes in. It's things that we all recognize and are curious about. So like, there's a hotel here that has a marquee, and it's being redeveloped, so they're not using the marquee at the moment. So this arts group has taken it over and is putting little bits of poetry and sayings on it, and they're sort of inexplicable unless you know the background. So I've been kind of covering what they've been up to there, and that's that kind of wraps it all up. There's a lot of stories like that are just interesting people doing interesting things, and we haven't even gotten to the big redevelopment projects. Who's building an apartment complex here, or some kind of cultural facility there. Just those things we see and can touch and can walk to and all feel like we have some kind of stake in. That's kind of the people and stuff you can walk to philosophy. That's what gives you your overall balanced news diet.
So the thing that you just said there about the marquee and the different phrases, that brings me back to college, where we had an athletic director who, in his message that he would send out at the start of every athletic season, would quote an opera or would quote some obscure musical reference. And you couldn't figure that out, like why he was doing that, until you actually talked to him and he explained his artistic tastes and music tastes and things of that sort. So I'm just curious, how did that story turn out with regards to the marquee?
It was actually kind of difficult because so what they were doing, they were putting sayings just like in Spanish on one side of the marquee, and then weird English translations or some other kind of response to that on the other side of the marquee. So I couldn't figure this out. And I know enough Spanish to know something was a little off kilter about it. So I called up the building's owner and they literally told me they had no idea what this was. So I've got a building owner who doesn't know what's going on their marquee. So we just kind of gee, I wonder what's up with this story. Talked to a native Spanish speaker who dissected exactly what was a little weird about what was going on there, and then left it be for a couple of months until I stumbled upon some evidence online that this particular arts group may have been responsible for it. So I tracked them down. It wasn't a guerrilla thing or anything like that. They got permission from the city, who's like involved in the funding of the redevelopment. So it wasn't, it's not, they're not sneaking around doing this or anything, but so they kind of explained what was going on. I mean, it's a cool little project. They're taking a bunch of random sayings that local residents kind of have embedded in their memory, and primarily ones that don't quite translate into English. So I could go into the Spanish analysis here, but it's stuff that just doesn't quite fit in the other language. So the whole thing is supposed to be this meditation on bicultural, bilingual living, and it's a great little project.
Nice, but that's cool though. That's like local mysteries, things that are of local interest. When we talked to someone doing on like a hyper local thing in Charlottesville, Virginia, they mentioned that the top story that they had done was about a bathroom being installed at a local, shopping plaza. Those are the things that people care about, in addition to the local government stories and the important things that are going on. There are ways to draw people in with both. So I saw in some of your online samples that you showed me stories about new businesses, what's happening with parking in different areas seemed to be a big theme. You had some history features, and then you had Inspector Dan, which is a local, trying to answer questions and review public facilities as if they were restaurants. Where do you get all your
Yes.
story ideas? And tell us about that one in particular.
Sure. Story ideas are really not hard to find. A lot of people just email them too, because anytime anyone's curious about something these days, they will email me. A lot of it's like, hey, it seems like there's some construction going on this thing. What is that? Like, what's the new restaurant, or why did the old restaurant go out of business? Things like that. So yeah, basically, or changes to public infrastructure, broader trends are stories, but anything people might talk about with their neighbor across the street or over the fence, that's probably a good hyperlocal news story. And then there's what the government is up to too, which happens in these stuffy meeting rooms, but also has a lot of relevance that goes right back to those things you can see and touch and walk over to. So when it comes to Inspector Dan, gosh, that actually evolved out of Detective Dan, and there's a slight difference there. Detective Dan is just answering reader questions, so they'll say like, "Hey, what's going on with this construction project?" and then we'll answer it. So that's a popular feature. But then it kind of evolved into the idea that we have these bits of government infrastructure all over the place, whether it's parks or these very prominent bus stops we have along our main street here. And they're a big part of our life. And a lot of times they're not in great shape, but it's hard to have a news story about that, right? Like, news is normally something that changes. So I was trying to find a way to kind of spotlight that. And then, I don't know, at some point it occurred to me that it might be fun to review government infrastructure as though it were a restaurant. and so we did. I hired a guy to go around. I mean, he used to collect data for the federal government and before he retired. So he's good at, getting a clipboard and making tisk 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 noises when he sees too much trash at the bus stop or something like that, or in the park. So yeah, he just kind of went around and cataloged everything that was right and everything that was wrong with various pieces of infrastructure. So it's kind of an ongoing series that just kind of spotlights things we see every day and may notice and may not, but we sure do now.
And along those lines, something that I think kind of is similar to that is the data journalism that you do. And this reminded me of something that we had interviewed someone about in one of our earliest episodes, where you're tracking, like, manually, literally going around. You have someone going around and tracking and counting certain things. What are you currently tracking, and what would you like to be tracking, maybe that you're not?
Yeah, we track a lot of stuff. Bunch of random indicators, I guess, in several different categories. And that's not really unlike what most reporters do. They'll check in on things, check in on various stats, or the latest numbers from such and such or whatever. The difference is that we take those numbers and make them into charts and turn them into an editorial product. So on a very regular basis, readers will get to see the latest, river flow numbers in the Rio Grande, how many people are riding the bus or the commuter train, local real estate prices, rental prices down to the zip code, hotel occupancy, because it's a pretty big tourism industry, is pretty big in greater downtown. There's even a feature we do regularly that highlights interesting books found in mini libraries around the zone. The kind of latest and greatest data feature we've been doing is a tracker on the health of the downtown core. Because like I mentioned, there's this like ongoing, will it revitalize or will it not question that kind of hangs over the head of every greater downtown resident. And we all want to see it happen. So this tracker follows stuff like open hours, vacancies, pedestrian counts, street parking occupancy rates, things that could, how do I put this? We all want downtown to get busier and better and more attractive, but it's often hard to tell from quarter to quarter if that's actually happening. So the goal here is to measure that and rely less on anecdotes and rumors. And so hopefully we can tell when it's really improving.
Is that you, as simple as you literally going somewhere and counting?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of the business hours can be done on Google. The vacancy stuff, you just walk around and I mean, it's a pain to set up, but it's check in on it
It's good
once a quarter.
exercise.
Oh yeah, for sure. Uh, street parking stuff, and yeah, I mean, you can tell pedestrian counts pretty easily too. I mean, I just plant myself down in two particular spots once a quarter and count how many people pass by in a 20-minute period between noon and 1.
Yep.
And that's pretty much all there is to it. But in terms of what I would like to track, the thing that's been bugging me lately is it's really hard to know sales tax figures. And if we could localize sales tax figures, it would actually be really helpful in terms of covering a central business district and the historic district, our old town, because it's I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes when downtown, just how productive downtowns are. They often don't look as shiny and glitzy as the rest of the city, but often they are cash cows for local government. Often they are subsidizing the rest of town, even if they look a little rough around the edges. This is a big theme of the Strong Towns organization, by the way. They do a lot of work on this, but so far, unfortunately, it does not appear to be possible to get highly localized sales tax data, but I'm still digging, so we'll see what happens.
So you get all this information, you get all these stories. What are the mechanics at work here? Is it as simple as just importing things into MailChimp, picking a couple of photos, or taking some photos, picking a couple of photos, plugging it in, sending it out via MailChimp or Substack or whatever your thing of choice is, and collecting the subscription rates? And you can mention what those are, certainly. Just, what are the mechanics in terms of like the actual doing?
Yeah, it's basically as you described. It's about as low tech as high tech gets. Yeah, it's MailChimp. It's a payment platform called MoonClerk, and my phone as a camera, and that's pretty much it. I mean, we have a website, but it's It's basically just a vehicle for people to sign up, and its subscriptions are $10 a month or $100 a year. But yeah, I sort of despise websites as a medium for distributing local news. I think they're terrible. So newsletters are much better in every single way you can imagine, I think.
I get it. And I'm thinking back to the days of when I was like, 10, 11, 12 years old and, seeing the newsletters and getting things in the mail and different sorts of things. So yeah, it seems very cool. And you feel like you've made it into a viable business?
Oh yeah. No, we have 550 subscribers. So gosh, what does that work out to? I don't know. It's like when it's all said and done, we're grossing 60 or 70,000, but we're growing usually by about 100, 150 subscribers a year. So I'm paying my mortgage just fine. And I have dad as a kind of quarter or third time employee there. So yeah, it's doing great. And I think and by the way, it's doing great in an impoverished area. Our downtown is not in great shape. The poverty rate of both of our main zip codes is significantly higher than the national average by several percentage points. And yet it's doing pretty well here. I suspect it would do even better in even other more affluent parts of Albuquerque, much less in other states that are much wealthier than New Mexico. So yeah, I guess I started out being kind of a arrogant little brat about this business model, but nothing I've experienced has checked me away from that. So
Who are your readers?
they tend to be people who I guess a friend of mine described it as news nerds and professional citizens. That's kind of the core. So, people who are curious, people who would read the newspaper back in the day, and then people who have some kind of, professional or, financial or emotional investment in the area. Because particularly if you're rooted in a place and you really care about it, you want it to succeed, you spend a lot of your time wandering around, wondering if it's going to be okay. And I think a good newspaper can maybe not definitively answer that question, but at least tell you if it's going in the right direction, or perhaps alert you to things that are going wrong that you might need to get involved with. So yeah, I think it's the same people who always read newspapers, or at least the news sections of newspapers. So I think there's always people in a society who are really curious and people who are less so. And the ones who are curious will happily pay for local news.
People like me, yeah. Will you ever have ads? You don't have ads, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm morally opposed to ads. I don't think they are a great addition. I think they're kind of bothersome to the to the reader. It's like you don't have to sift through this nonsense. Yeah, there's obvious conflict of interest that could arise from having them. And I'm not really convinced, given that the internet basically offers an unlimited supply of ad space, I'm not really convinced that a significant amount of money could be generated with with a small audience like what we have. So it just doesn't seem to be worth the trouble. But if somebody else wants to take this model and also incorporate ads, then
yep,
more power to them. Whatever results in more reporters being hired.
What's the hardest part of the job?
I'd say it's probably living in the coverage zone. On one hand, it's actually not a grueling job by any stretch. I hear a lot of journalists talk about their jobs as being just insane and super stressful, and it's not. I've rigged it up so I get plenty of time off. Dad gets plenty of time off, and the usual typical work week. Some weeks are busier than others, but typically it's just a normal job. It's 40, 45 hours a week, and that's about it. But in terms of the difficulty, and this is a blessing and a curse. Living in your coverage zone has all sorts of advantages, but it does mean that random errands can feel like work. I kind of feel like like, oh, what's going on over there? I need to do a story
I
about
was going to
that.
say, can you turn it off?
No.
Yep.
Well, and then you meet other people too. It's like, I know way too, there are like coffee shops in this coverage zone I cannot walk into unless I want to be like Mr. On reporter. I can't like roll in there in my pajamas or anything like that. But luckily there's an easy fix for this, and it's called going to your friend's house out of the coverage zone and having a barbecue. So I do that a
Gotcha.
lot.
I was going to ask what you do, and I had read that bicycling is a big thing for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do tend to bicycle usually to that friend's house
Nice.
where there is barbecue and martinis.
So how has journalism impacted how you view the world?
I'd say it's probably completely warped it beyond all recognition. It's really kind of hard to answer that because I mean I was in a very journalistic frame of mind from age 12 or 13, and I don't know, before that I was basically just interested in like train sets and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd say if there is an iron law of journalism, it's probably that things are usually more complicated than they appear. So what I would like to think is that journalism has made me a little bit more of a nuanced thinker and slightly less of an idiot, but I guess I'll leave that for others to decide.
So a couple of things here to close. I want to ask for some advice within creating a startup newsletter in someone else's town. It seems like everyone has a Substack these days. You can use MailChimp, which you're doing as well. There are differences between the two. And I'd be curious, when you're giving that advice with that, is there a mistake along the way that you made that you think that people could learn from that might want to do this?
Sure. So I mean, if you're starting up, I'd say the one really important thing that people tend to ignore is to find a town, or more commonly a part of a town, that has a coherent sense of itself and some common interests. That may be an entire city, but that is not the case, for example, in Albuquerque, where we have very little in common with people who live on the other side of the river. I mean, we share a mayor, but like not much else in terms of outlook and day-to-day life and interests. So make your coverage zone something that has an identity already. And then I'd say strongly consider charging money for your publication. uh, the trend seems to be all donations all the time. And on one hand, it's always inspiring to see somebody go out and start something like that. But on the other hand, people value the things that they pay for more than the things that they don't pay for. And the paid subscription model is more scalable. It's less time consuming because you don't have to be fundraising all the time. And it's probably our best hope to returning to those days when a very strong local news media could really promote a sense of community and prod the government into doing a better job. And I not to be melodramatic here, but I don't think we can afford to unilaterally disarm like that. We've got to be a well-capitalized industry if we're going to be a truly free press. So yeah, definitely charge money for it if you possibly can. In terms of mistakes I've learned, I started doing downtown Albuquerque news having kind of inherited this Metro Daily competition mindset, because we were one of two papers in town. This was back in the mid 2000s. And we were constantly had it hammered into us that we needed to beat our competition and get the story first and things like that. And we were obsessed with that. And in retrospect, I think that was an insecurity born of the fact that we did not have any particular special value to offer readers in the Albuquerque media equation. We were not following Loretta Lynn's famous rule that you need to be first, best, or different. We did not really have our niche. And unfortunately, I think I carried that internal psychodrama over to the first year or two of running Dan. And that was a dumb thing to do, because it turns out that if you are indeed first best or different, and in the case of Dan, that's mostly different, then people will appreciate it. And if they can't get it anywhere else and they want it, they'll pay for it. Readers, I've learned, care a lot less about how journalists compete with each other than journalists do, and we should probably take our cues from them.
Yes, very much so. I'm familiar with that on the sports side. So we salute you for your good work, and we ask that you do likewise. Is there a journalist or journalism organization that you're not affiliated with that you would like to salute for their good work?
Yes, I would like to salute the New Mexico Foundation for Open Government. They lobby, it's a group, they lobby and sometimes take legal action on behalf of press freedom and access to public records. It is the sort of support structure that journalism really needs. And not to beat a dead horse here, but that is also a reason we need to get our financial act together in this business, because a free press is about a lot more than dedication and pluck. We really, really need aggressive packs of expensive, foaming at the mouth lawyers and lobbyists backing us up here. So the Fog does a great job, but they need more money. So they need a stronger industry to get them that money. So, but they do excellent work. So
I know that they're an important organization because I've had two guests from New Mexico, you and Inez Russell Gomez, and you both said the same. You both saluted the same place.
Oh, did we? Oh,
yes,
okay.
So
that's terrific.
Good call. Peter Rice, Downtown Albuquerque News. You want to just give a plug as to where people can find it?
Sure, it's downtownalbuquerquenews.com.
Cool. Peter Rice, thank you for taking the time to join us. Best of luck with your publication, and we will be following it closely.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Journalism Salute. Please let us know what you think of the show. You can find us on Twitter @JournalismPod, and you can email us at journalismsalute@gmail.com.